So welcome to another episode of Association Peeps, Cubicles Drinking Coffee. I'm Benedict here with Partners in Association Management. And today we're going to focus on marketing because we've got marketing guru Scott Oser here with us, and Scott Oser and Associates. Who's going to talk about his company in a moment, but certainly pretty well renowned in terms of his background working with groups like National Geographic and AARP, amongst other groups. And started his own consulting firm. Has been a great contributor to the association profession for many years, and we're privileged to have you here with us, Scott. So, Scott, tell us a little bit about your firm. I know you recently have gone between Maryland and California now, and now you're confused on where you live, but tell us about your company.
Sure. Thanks, Ben, and thanks for having me. Scott Oser Associates started almost 15 years ago now, which is pretty scary. I've been in the association space for almost 25 years now. But what we do is we really help associations with their membership marketing and their sales needs. So in addition to doing membership, recruitment, retention, and engagement, we also work on marketing of conferences and marketing of membership. And then on the other side of my business, it's really doing advertising, exhibiting, and sponsorship sales. So we really kind of have our hands in three different pots in the association space.
Very cool. So, I mean, just what's a typical day now with all the diversity in terms of groups that you work with? What are the key, I'd say, focus areas that you have in terms of core projects right now that the association community is seeking from you?
One is I think that I was very fortunate because I had just sort of lucked into being in a membership role when I first started in associations. So membership is, in my opinion, the lifeblood of most associations, especially membership organizations. Whether it's trade or individual, that's a critical area that they need to focus on because, in my opinion, if the association doesn't have members, it doesn't have programs, it doesn't have services, it doesn't have events, because that's what we're all based off of. And that also brings in the community aspect, which I think is very, very important. So one of the things that I'm always working with associations is how to engage their members, how to make them feel like they're a vital part of the organization all year long, not just when they join, not just when they renew, but all the time. And that's not necessarily purchasing things or going to a conference. It's how do they get involved? How do they feel like they're part of the community? So I'm always working with associations on that. Then the other side is just revenue. Even though we are nonprofits, I think that the saying is that nonprofit is a tax status, not a goal for an association or for a nonprofit organization. So it's bringing in that exhibit, sponsorship, and ad sales revenue, because not that associations aren't capable of doing that on their own, but sometimes they just don't have the staff, they don't have the resources to do it. So we help them bring in that revenue, and then it's a win-win for everybody.
Just in terms of the scope, obviously compared to 20 years ago, the tools we have, to do these things are obviously much better efficiencies and just ease, if you will, but still find organizations that are still hesitant or just still not doing things that they, using the tools that they have available. How do you walk them through that journey to kind of, not only the technology integration piece of it, but just getting into that routine and sticking with it? How do you help them get through that?
I think that it's interesting that you mentioned routine, because that's a lot of the work that I do with associations. Routine is not the exact word, but it's setting up processes and procedures. It's putting things in a place and making sure that your processes and procedures are set up so that you can actually get things done on a regular basis. That's what I find. I find that many people in associations, or most people in associations, are very intelligent people, and they have their hearts in the right place and they're willing to do the hard work. They just don't have the resources. They don't have the time. They don't have the money necessarily. So therefore, looking at what they're currently doing and seeing what's working and what's not working, and then putting up processes that can be repeated over and over and over again is a critical piece of the work that I do. Because if it's not done at the same time in the same way on a regular basis, it's probably not going to get done. I've got some long time ago examples where I would say to people, how are your renewals doing? And they're going, well, when we get them out, then this is what happens. And I'm thinking to myself, when you get them out, how do you not get them out? But because it's a small staff situation and they only have so many resources, sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't. And I'm like, I don't know who's setting the priorities there, but getting your renewals out has to happen. So in that situation, we outsourced it so that they could get them done on a regular basis. But there are solutions. It just sometimes takes that outside perspective or just a fresh set of eyes, even internally sometimes, to say, all right, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Or in some ways, what are we just not doing right now that can make all of our lives easier so that we can get everything done that we need to get done?
In terms of your focus, how much of the time, if you will, and for most groups is spent with the staff as opposed to the board or other volunteers with the organizations?
It really varies depending on organization, but most of the time for me, it's almost all staff. Sometimes if it's a very small organization and the board has a role either in the sales cycle or on the membership or the marketing side, then they will get involved, but mostly it's working with the staff to figure out, again, what they can do and what they can't do, what their goals are. And I'm able to, I don't want to bring up the word silos, but I'm going to. Oftentimes you've got silos in different associations. So not everybody knows exactly what everybody else is doing, and sometimes there's overlap that hasn't even been identified. So one of the things that I can do as an external entity is say, all right, wait a minute, so-and-so is doing this, but you're also kind of doing this. Why aren't you guys doing this together? Or why isn't one person doing this? So that way it gets done more efficiently and more effectively. A lot of the work that I do, and I think this is real important in big associations and small, but almost more important in small, is just making sure that things are efficient and effective. Because if they're not efficient and effective, they're just not going to get done, or they're not going to get done in a way that they get the optimal result that they're looking for.
In terms of not only just your speaking engagements that you go out and do with a lot of the state societies and ASAE as well, you do a great job with your newsletter that people can subscribe to, and just talk about kind of key trends that you're seeing over the last 12 to 16 months that you're seeing that kind of like, I didn't see that coming, or that I saw that coming and now it's just on overdrive, that kind of thing. What are some of those hot topics?
I think one of the biggest topics that I see, and this goes back to being efficient and effective with your marketing, is targeting and segmenting. Like I said, I've been in the association world for like 25 years, and I think that years ago you could send everything to everyone, and people would be willing to take the time to sort through it and feel what is appropriate and see what is appropriate and applicable to them. People aren't willing to do that anymore. And from a marketing perspective, that also results in just overload, because you're mailing or emailing, you're communicating everything to everybody. So what I have seen over time more and more is that associations are now realizing they can be more effective, more efficient by targeting and segmenting their messages. So instead of sending everything to everybody, and I'll just use this as an easy example, like your regular members, your core members, from whatever the profession is, they get one message because they have a different, distinct set of needs compared to, let's just say, your industry partners. Your industry partners don't want the same thing as your regular members, but because it's easier, or it was easier, to just put all of your member benefits all together and ask your members, whether they're regular members or their industry partners, to sort through what's for them, that's what we used to do. But now, because of technology, it makes it so much easier to say, all right, I'm going to get the right people, the right message at the right time. And that's one of the biggest trends that I'm seeing. We have some challenges with technology. Technology is our friend, but depending on the system you use, depending on your knowledge of the system, sometimes that's not that easy. Sometimes we just don't have the data. But what I have seen that is going on is that most associations now are at least putting their key audiences into buckets, not one-to-one, like it's not going to be Bennett, you like to do this, Scott, you like to do this, so I'm going to target you that way. But in most situations, at least it's, all right, you're this type of member, Scott, you're this type of member, so I'm going to target you and I'm going to message you appropriately. And that has huge impact, because then we're much more likely to hear the message, we're much more likely to read the message. And so we're much more efficient, we're much more effective, because we're not just sending messages out that nobody's reading. And that's the last thing that we want to do, is spend our time producing things that nobody is reading and nobody's paying attention to.
Let's talk about just the community that we work in. Anything that you see different in terms of approach for trade associations compared to professional societies or individual membership organizations?
I always find that's an interesting question, because I have found that as I talk to people, that sometimes the trade association folks think they're completely different than the individual membership organizations. I think there are unique things to each. And I think in some ways, it all comes down to, what are your members looking for from you? And what does your association provide to meet those needs? So you could say, sure, trade associations are different, right? Because it's an organization joining, it's not an individual joining. But ultimately, someone is paying those dues, right? Someone is making the decision to say, I want X number of my employees to attend the conference or participate in a webinar or take advantage of the benefits. So you still have to get the right messaging out there. I agree that it is different in the sense that sometimes you have a gatekeeper issue with a trade association, because sometimes you're trying to get to the president of a large organization and you're talking about a $5,000 or $10,000 purchase, not $125 for a year like an individual. So you have to. It's more challenging, or it can be more challenging, to prove the value, and the messaging needs to be different. But overall, to me, it's about the value. Whether you're an individual membership organization or you're a trade organization, you still got to prove to the right audiences that there is a value in being a member. And whether that's going in a trade organization and making sure that all of the people that are actually using your services understand and know, and they have the tools that they need to talk to the person who's writing the check, or it's an individual membership organization where you're going right to the purchaser, right to the end user, you still have to coordinate, you still have to communicate that value. And so I think that there are, yes, unique differences, but I think there are more similarities than there are differences, actually.
So when you're out in the field, speaking at state societies, if you will, are there different types of questions that people are posing compared to 2 years ago, just in terms of what they're facing, their pain points?
I actually feel like the pain points are pretty much the same. I believe firmly that associations are just as strong and just as smart as our for-profit counterparts. I have heard throughout my entire career that, hey, associations are 5 years behind. I think, yes, some of them are, but you can't put a blanket statement over all for-profits versus all associations. It just doesn't work on either side. But what I have found recently is that more and more associations are trying to jump on top of the technology bandwagon. They're trying to get into using Google AdWords and using retargeting campaigns and using marketing automation. To me, it all comes down to being smarter about the way that we work. The challenges are still the same. The challenges are still resources. The challenges are showing the value. The challenges are doing all of those same sorts of things that we had 10 years ago, but our vehicles to achieve those results is very, very different. And I think one of the biggest challenges that associations are facing with now is, as opposed to 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when it was how much direct mail do we do versus how much email do we do versus how much telephone do we do, now it's, you've got 20 different sources. You've got retargeting, you've got social media, you've got phone still, you've got email still, you've got direct mail still, but it's how do we make that mix work when we're not going to be experts in everything, and we also don't have the resources to do everything. So how do we prioritize, and how are we efficient? How are we effective with the resources we have, knowing that there's now so many more tools that we can use to achieve a result?
Just kind of close on, just in terms of going into 2020, what do you think, marketing or branding, what's going to be the hot topic going into 2020?
I think there's kind of two. One that I think is awesome for associations and for-profits as well is marketing automation. I think that if we can take the time to set up a program in advance and then let it run, obviously we've got to monitor the results. We've got to make sure it's working. You can't just leave it and let it go forever. But if you can get the right system in place and let your marketing run on its own, it's huge. It's effort up front, but it saves you so much time on the back end. If you have a system that's capable enough to base it off of actions that are taken, even better. If somebody opens an email, this happens. If somebody doesn't open it, that happens. That's a pretty sophisticated system for a lot of associations. But even if you can set it up so that let's say your renewals, right? You want to do like a 90, 60, 30-day notice. If those can be automated in advance, someone doesn't have to put on their calendar on the 27th of every month, oops, I got to hit that button again. And just from, I hate beating up the word efficiency and effectiveness, but that's what it is. If we can be efficient and effective, that leaves us so much more time to do the other things that we're always asked to do. And once it becomes a well-oiled machine, let it run. Again, got to monitor response. You got to make sure it's working. You got to try new things. But if the nuts and bolts are nailed down, it's so much easier. And then the other piece, which scares me a little bit as a consumer, but we're all living with this nowadays, is what you can do digitally. I mean, how we can chase people around and make sure that the right people see our messages at the right time. That's current, and that's going to be the future. It's going to be more and more so. We all walk in a room with our phones, and unless we've got every sort of tracking piece turned off, we're instantly identifiable. So, we're here at FSAE. If this is not a great example, but let's just say that Georgia SAE wanted to track us and get us to join Georgia SAE and do something like that. They could show us ads the minute we walk into this hotel. It's huge. Scary as a human being, but huge because we're reaching the right people at the right time. And I think that's what marketing is going to become more and more this year, next year, and over the next forever.
Just again, thanks, Scott, for being with us on another episode, and we appreciate you being with us and all you do for the association community. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.